dedicated to empowering you with information
to make positive choices
and be advocates for your overall well-being.
Welcome to The Health View.
I'm Yvonne Dunetz. Welcome to The Health View. Today we're going to tackle an important topic, and that is about the decentralization of energy and the food supply system. My guest is Jeff Cantara. Jeff, welcome. We're so pleased to have you here. And I know that you're a permaculture designer and a solar energy as well as an organic farmer. And these are the two specialties that you've integrated within your life. I'd like you to share a little bit with our audience about your passion and how you've integrated all of this into your work life, as well as your personal life, because as an organic farmer, you have a lot to share with us. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much. And that's exactly right, Yvonne. I'm Jeff Cantara, and I'm with Groundswell Farms, a permaculture farm on the New Hampshire Seacoast, and Revision Energy, an employee-owned solar and energy efficiency company based in Maine and in New Hampshire. And I'm super grateful to be here today. It's exciting. It's an exciting time. And you're right. It has been an interesting pathway. I guess I would start just at the beginning. Ever since I was a little kid, I have been enamored with making a lifestyle off the land. I was fascinated by the mountain men and the pioneers and all of that when I was a growing child. And I took that interest and it stayed with me through college, where I studied natural resources management. And throughout that college education, I knew a lot of people that were going to live on the land, or they were going to do self-sufficiency or what have you. And most of those folks are on Wall Street now, and it's funny. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I've kind of stuck with this path of sustainability. And there's times I've questioned that. But recent events, the COVID-19 pandemic, have really made me see how building a life based around resilience and sustainability makes a lot of sense. So real briefly, after finishing up college, I worked as a wildlife biologist and a forester for the United States Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management and some consulting firms on the New Hampshire Seacoast. And concurrently with that, I leased a worn down, kind of played out organic farm where the older farmer was retiring. And initially, I leased it just as a place to live. I like to live in a natural environment. But there were some old greenhouses there. And he told me, as long as you're getting the cabin fixed up, you might as well work on those greenhouses. Well, one thing led to another. And 3 years later, I found myself as the owner of a 70-acre farm, kind of learning as I went. But what I had that served me was a formal training in ecology from the University of Vermont. And I realized quickly that a farm is nothing more than an ecosystem. And I began applying some of those same principles just at a different scale. And I was really fortunate to build that over time into a really dynamic and vibrant farm. And life can get interesting at times. I did have a curveball thrown at me back in the mid 2000s, back around 2014. I had a life change, and I was off the farm for a couple of years, and I needed to figure out something to do that would be in line with the values that I had cultivated on the farm. And I was incredibly fortunate to be directed towards Revision Energy, which is an employee-owned solar company that does both residential and commercial solar projects, but also more importantly, low-income solar projects and projects that are focused on sustainability throughout New England. And I thought it might be a one-year thing, something to let me get back on my feet. But here I find myself, 5 years later, and I love it. It is my life's love and work. But I was fortunate enough back at the end of 2018 to purchase my farm back. And I have brought that back with a renewed focus on permaculture, which is a perennial, permanent agriculture that moves away from things like annual tillage and things of that nature, and focuses on systems design and the implementation of perennial food systems, fruit trees and associated crops, all working together in an integrated system that can provide abundance and an incredibly dense amount of calories on a limited spatial basis. So my goal now is to continue building demonstration projects here on the farm, which is solar powered, I might add, and to propagate that knowledge out through the community, through classes, and through outreach such as this show that we're on today. So again, I'm grateful to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a great entry for you. When we talk about decentralization of a food system, from your growth and learning of the food environment as well as the natural environment, as we live in times of a pandemic, what we might have talked about decentralization of the energy and the food supply system even a few months ago may be different from what we need to talk about today. From your knowledge, what is the most important things that we need to do related to decentralizing the food system?
Well, it's an interesting question. And at first, I want to acknowledge that I think you're exactly right. What was once the fodder of apocalyptic movies or things like that, late night science fiction, is now suddenly a lot closer to reality than I think a lot of people had once anticipated. When COVID-19 was beginning, I think it was the first time that people started to think, and fortunately it hasn't come to that, but maybe the trucks will stop rolling. Maybe the supermarkets will be empty. And I think we saw that on a very limited scale, but I think that opened the eyes of a lot of people. And I want to make the connection too, that when we talk about decentralizing the food system and decentralizing the energy system, we are really just talking about decentralizing the energy system, because food is, of course, energy too. And we're just talking about that from different umbrellas. So what I guess I would encourage people to do is to become engaged. I was incredibly fortunate through the mid 2000s to really see the blossoming of the local food movement in New Hampshire. Here on the New Hampshire Seacoast, that was driven by advocacy groups such as Slow Food and Seacoast Eat Local. And I know there are similar groups throughout New Hampshire. And I think what they did was they encouraged people to start thinking about where that food came from, to engage with the food, to be mindful with the food. And I think the same thing is true of many of the people that I work with consulting on solar projects. They're just looking at, how do I engage with my energy? They've moved beyond just flipping the light switch or pushing the start button on the microwave, and they're starting to look at the big picture. And when we look at that big picture, we realize how centralized some of our infrastructure is, whether those are large monocrop tillage-based farms in the Midwest, or nuclear power plants or coal burning power plants, or the fracking system or things like that provide the majority of the energy in the United States when we turn on that light switch. And when we have centralization, we have risk that's attendant with that. If there were to be an impact to a food system or to a conventional energy generation system, then literally millions of people are at risk. But when you decentralize or distribute that production, whether that's through home gardens or solar on rooftops or solar in community solar farms or on top of businesses, or integrating that with wind or micro hydro or any of the other viable renewable energy sources that are present, we minimize that risk because we build redundancy. And when we have that, we can begin to diminish our fears that we might be feeling when we address something that's new and scary like COVID-19. And I was just introduced to a sobering thought yesterday, which is, well, we're dealing with COVID-19 now. We may well be dealing with COVID-20 and COVID-21 and COVID-22. So I think the time is now to really start implementing these changes on a personal level with just small steps. And we can get into that a little bit, what some of those small steps might be.
Let's begin with that right now. What are the small steps that we could begin doing right now?
Well, it's an interesting thing. When I meet people and they hear about my background as an organic farmer or doing permaculture design, a lot of people feel they have to apologize to me for their small gardens or their tomato plant in a 5-gallon bucket or something like that. And I tell them it's exactly the opposite. That type of work should be celebrated. Just by, taking control of your situation, even on a small level like that, you're ahead of 98, 97% of the populace, and you've made that little incremental step that moves you along. You're engaging in your own food production. I happen to think one of the projects that I'm pioneering here on the farm, and it's by no means an original idea, similar projects exist all over the United States, but is the concept of creating perennial food forests, which are small, suburban lawn scale gardens that are focused around perennial fruit trees, perennial nut-bearing trees, and perennial crops such as asparagus, rhubarb, and many others that come back year after year that can be put in in place of the front lawn. Now, we all have an aesthetic, standard that we like to adhere to. Everybody wants that American dream of, the green front lawn, the Fenway Park in their front yard. But I would argue that, largely the American lawn is a disaster. And one of the easiest ways that we can make a big change is to plow that under and start putting in beautiful, beautiful plants that can provide both habitat for pollinators and food for us. Let's think about that for a second. With the lawn, what do? We pay somebody to take away all the organic matter in the fall when the leaves have fallen, and then we pay somebody to come back and to poison that lawn in the spring because the lack of organic matter that we took away in the fall leads to an unhealthy lawn that needs to be managed through herbicides and pesticides and chemical fertilizers. And that gets into a cycle that is very, very difficult to break. Simply turning lawns back to soil, adding organic matter in the form of mulch, letting trees, which are large nutrient pumps, they're pumps that are bringing nutrients up from deep in the soil, putting them out into the leaves and distributing them down onto the earth each fall, leaving that be and starting to plant some crops in there is easy to do. And what I'm trying to do on the farm here is create a model that can be replicated, on the quarter-acre lot scale. I'm very fortunate that I live on 70 acres, but I'm mindful that that's not replicable for most of the people. And at times, I feel overwhelmed by the scale of land that I have. If somebody simply goes onto YouTube and Googles YouTube searches the phrase food forest or permaculture or perennial agriculture, there are literally hundreds of people doing incredibly gorgeous projects that ultimately end up benefiting themselves and their neighbors through the food that's produced and the wildlife habitat that's created and the absence of the pesticides and herbicides that are part of the norm today. So that would be something that's easy to do. To sum that up into one phrase, I would say plant something.
Okay,
Don't be
so
afraid.
I'm sorry.
Don't be afraid. Plants are easy. Plants are easy. You're not going to kill it. They're very resilient. Plants are generally hardy. Take a risk. Find your local farm. See if they're selling any perennial crops. If not, reach out to a local nursery, which often has some of these perennial things, and simply put one thing in the ground and then maybe put something in a little bit later and then build on that over time. And before you know it, you have something that is substantial. It's not something that has to be done in one large fell swoop.
And so where does one start? What are the most important things to begin to plant?
That's a great question. And I guess I would say plant what you like. There's different schools of thought on it. I'm not a survivalist or a prepper or any of those things, but people that do cleave to those thoughts typically think about, how many calories can they produce in a given area. And I don't really think about things like that. I like to plant things that are fun and things that I like to eat. So for example, strawberries are an incredible example. Of course, you're not going to live for a year on a small strawberry garden, but that's something that you can put in. It's very low risk, it's very low effort, and it's a very high reward. After you enjoy your strawberries, well, a wonderful companion plant for that is asparagus. Then after that, you might want to put in a very small fruit tree. A fruit tree today, a dwarf fruit tree is no more than 6 feet tall and maybe an arm span in width. So on my farm this week, I'll be putting in hardy apricots, which is something that I'm thrilled about. I never would have thought that we could grow that in our climate, but turns out we can. So, instead of that burning bush or that barberry or some of the other, conventional decorative shrubs that go in, why not put in something that you can eat? And
yep. And then where would you find these things? Where would you find that hardy apricot?
Yep. So what a great Google search term would be edible nursery or perennial edible nurseries. And these are plants that typically are shipped through the mail. As I say, I just had 2 apricots shipped this week. I received a plum tree that's going in. I received that through the mail last week. And these are trees that might cost, $25, $30, and a couple bucks for shipping. And then, the time from planting to yielding fruit in a meaningful way is 2 or 3 years. That might seem like a long time, but you have to think that that's the beginning of something that is going to produce for 25, 30, or 40 years if it's taken care of. So I always tell people start with what you like. And before COVID came in and people were just looking for regular gardening advice, I would say this: if you're a new gardener, it's often that people have big eyes. Everybody's got big ideas of what they want to do, and I would always advise people to take the garden that they had planned and cut it down by half or 2/3. Make it small. Start with something that's manageable, because you're going to get a lot more production out of something that is small and managed well than from something that is large and that gets away from you and that becomes a chore and becomes unenjoyable. So start. Learn some basic skills. YouTube, again, is a great resource. There's also people that teach classes in the community, myself amongst them, that can get people started on these type of things. But again, it's not rocket science. This is something that there's a lot of room for error built into the equation. There's no real right or wrong way to do it. A tree goes into the ground, it receives mulch, it receives water, and it's largely going to do its own thing. You'd have to work to make that not succeed.
And those are things you could start to plant on your front lawn, you were saying.
Exactly. I mean, how beautiful is it that right now, as we drive around, we might be noticing that the wild plum trees are flowering, or some of the other trees. There's a service bush which produces an edible berry, and that's a wild native that's present right now, but it can also be grown as a cultivar. And those are producing beautiful white flowers on 8-foot tall shrubs right now, and those are every bit as beautiful as the magnolias or the dogwoods or some of the other species that we might get down at the landscaping center. So I don't think that one needs to sacrifice aesthetics or lifestyle to do these things. I think it can become a complement to a healthy lifestyle, and it can add value to both the property and to our own health when we make some of these simple switches.
So let's talk about the vegetable garden, because
Sure.
that is something that is important that some people now, based upon the pandemic, that might not have thought about it before, want to make sure that they have some healthy vegetables within their gardens. What would you recommend for them to start out? Like you had said before, you said sometimes people are embarrassed or say apologize for a small container of tomatoes. But if you started out small to medium, what would be the most important things for people to try to grow that would be successful that they could utilize?
Sure. Well, I'll harken back to always grow what you like. If you don't like, artichokes, there's no point in going through all the effort of growing that. I'd say pick a couple things that you like. And, what are the classics? It's probably tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, some type of leafy green. Carrots can be a little tricky, but, start with a couple of core things. And that can be as simple as growing those in a nice, well-drained soil in a container. It can be a patio planter or a clean food grade 5-gallon bucket with some holes drilled in the bottom for drainage. Just put into a sunny spot. And I'll tell you, you can grow some pretty nice tomatoes doing that, and it tastes pretty good on a July night when you slice into those. It doesn't have to be from a fancy manicured scenario. But if people are interested in getting into a more or slightly larger garden, or something that they can come back to year in the same spot, I would encourage them to investigate the concept of what's called either sheet mulching or alternately lasagna gardening, which sounds like a funny term until you hear exactly what it is. And this is a technique that was pioneered by a woman in the 1960s and 70s named Ruth Stout. And what she looked at was not digging up the soil and killing the grass and tilling everything up. She looked at building a garden on top of the soil. And you can do that with the raised beds that you see, or you can do that simply by, believe it or not, putting sheets of cardboard after you've taken, the tape and the labels and things like that and the staples out of it, sheets of cardboard down onto the ground in the footprint of the garden that you would like to construct. And then layering on top of that leaf clippings and lawn clippings and maybe a little bit of compost from the garden center or things of that nature. And what happens is you will smother the sod beneath that, and you will have tons and tons and tons and tons of earthworms coming up through that cardboard to eat that organic matter. And before long, you have a really integrated garden space with minimal effort that you can get carrots into. You can get peas, lettuce, all of these crops that like a little bit more cooler soil that you sometimes wouldn't see in a 5-gallon bucket that's, getting warmth from all sides around it. And it really is that addition of organic matter. Organic matter is simply anything that contains carbon. It can be wood chips, it can be leaves, it can be grass clippings, it can be seaweed, it can be anything like that. Just building these layers and planting directly into that. We have a patch here at the farm, just small. We did a little kitchen garden, and we started it this way a few years ago. I always tell people I have a 70-acre, farm, but I dream of just having a garden, because a farm and a garden are two different things. And I'd love to be able to go out to something that I can relax in rather than something that's an avocation at times. But long story short, we made a small 8x10 area just using this technique, and without tilling the soil beneath that with a machine or anything else. 3 years later, I can reach in with my hand and I can go down almost to my elbow through the depth that the soil has been loosened up. And when we don't disturb the soil through mechanical tillage or pitchforks or rotavators or things of that nature, we respect the soil life that's in there, the microbes, the bacteria, the fungi in particular. And what those do is they work to release the nutrients that are present in the organic matter that we've added to that soil and make them available to the plants. And when those plants are grown in those techniques, they become very nutrient dense. And when we consume nutrient dense food, then we become healthy, which I know is the focus of your show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was a wonderful kind of a cook's tour that you just gave of how
it's a broad subject matter, and we're only scratching the surface in the time that we have available to us today. But the main takeaway, if you heard nothing else in that brief discussion there, was just, again, plant something. Go ahead, mess it up, screw it up, and learn. But take that step, get over that first hump of adoption resistance and get something in the ground, and then maybe later add something else. Get your kids involved, get the neighbors involved when it's okay to be, proximate to one another again, and see what happens. I think you'd be surprised at how easy it can be.
Now, there are CSAs and different other ways of being able to get organic, healthy food are coming from farms. And with what may happen, I mean, you hear some things that grocery stores related to supplies and the food chain itself may be impacted. What would you recommend for people to do besides really independently beginning to plant and taking that leap of between planting things they can eat, maybe herbs or things like that? What other ways can they be smart about the choices they make and help for their independence related to the health and wellness of their families regarding food?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and that's taking advantage of the rich local farm community that we have. And here in southern New Hampshire, that's particularly well established. And I know out in your neck of the woods, Hollis and Brookline and some of those other communities are still major agricultural centers. Basically, I would suggest reaching out, finding your local farm advocacy group. There are many, many clearinghouses that can direct people to local farms. One in particular is localharvest.org. You can put in your zip code and you'll be brought immediately to a directory of all the local farms and the various services in your area that they offer. If you're on the Seacoast, I would suggest checking out the Seacoast Harvest Guide, which is an in-depth summary of hundreds of local farms that are operating in this area. And many of those do provide the CSA, community supported agriculture option that you alluded to a moment ago. And a CSA is simply a mechanism that kind of revolutionized farming back in the 80s. And I may have my dates wrong, but it's close to that, where there was a recognition made amongst those who participated in sustainable agriculture that that farming is a two-way street. It's an engagement between the producer and the consumer. And in the past, the risk of farming was always disproportionately shouldered by the farmer. And this was a way to give people who wanted to support sustainable local agriculture a way to buy in and share risk with that farm. And in its conventional original sense, it truly was purchasing a share of the farm. So if that farm sold 40 CSA shares in a given year and they grew 80 pumpkins, then each shareholder would receive 2 pumpkins, of course, in addition to the other, items. But it was a true, share-based distribution. And now what it's evolved over into over time is more of a subscription-based agriculture model, where in some cases there is just a weekly distribution of all that is harvested, broken up amongst the members. Some farms operate where you purchase an annual credit. You might pay, $200 at the start of the season, but that entitles you to $225 of produce through the course of the year, or things of that nature. And you can use that on a la carte basis at the farm stand or something like that. In the older models, there was a lot of stories about people getting, 20 pounds of zucchini, or what the heck do I do with a basketball-sized kohlrabi? So if that's not your thing, maybe these a la carte, models where you can go in and select a little from the menu of foods that are available might be great. But this is a fantastic way to build resilience in the community as well, because we are supporting these decentralized producers of food. And what this model typically does is it gives the farmers their startup capital in the late winter, early spring, when there's very little income coming in. So they are getting the farm up and running at that point. And then those who invested in the farm are sharing in that bounty through the course of the season as that comes through. And I can tell you right now that the demand for local agriculture is at an all-time high. I can remember back in the mid 2000s when it became almost a status symbol. What CSA are you in? Oh, I'm in Willow Farm CSA. Oh, I'm in North Star Farm CSA. Oh, and everybody was really excited about that. And that's normalized a little bit over the years. But what I think is that there is an attendant, a renewed urgency of supporting these farms so they continue to be resources, hubs, if you will. I think of the small farm as a hub of knowledge and a hub of production, which can then radiate out and be a source of mentorship or supplies or plant materials or what have you for those of us who choose to pursue this on our own suburban backyard scale as well. So supporting those local farms is it's a mantra that we're all familiar with, but I think we see really the services that they provide right now. I know on the Seacoast, we have a farmers cooperative called the Three Rivers Farmers Alliance, run by several really innovative farmers that put this program together. And what that used to be was a wholesale distribution program for restaurants. Farmers could bring their crops in, be paid a fair amount, and then chefs could use an online app to order, whatever was in season to be delivered directly to their restaurant. Well, the restaurants are closed now. And now this organization has pivoted to a new model called Veggie Go, where they're taking all of that production that would have gone to the restaurants, and homeowners are ordering through these apps and having vegetables delivered right to their homes. So that's a pretty nice thing to do if you don't want to put your mask on and go to the supermarket and have to sanitize and stand 8 feet apart from everybody. It's pretty nice to have a big box of produce delivered each week to your home, and also have it be nutrient-dense produce. And I'm sure that there's similar programs to that are rearing up, all over the United States right now. So,
Is that Veggie Go? Just stop for 1 second. Is that just locally at the Seacoast, or how could people get that information and try to get it in other areas?
So that is the Seacoast, and I believe York County in Maine, and the North Shore of Massachusetts, the Amesbury, Newburyport kind of area there. But what I would do is I would reach out to the farms and in one's particular area, which again, you can likely find if you're not familiar with them through localharvest.org or any of the other kind of agriculture clearinghouses that are, if you just typed in organic farms near me on Google, you're going to get a list that you have many options available to you. But I'd reach out to them. This is a busy time of year. And one of the things that many of these farms are doing as well is a really robust garden seedling business at this time. So, plants that you're not going to find at the big box stores. So the heirloom vegetables, the unique varieties, the varieties bred for flavor and the home garden rather than for shipping. And now's a great time to order a couple tomato plants, a couple of pepper plants to put on the sunny corner of the house. Again, plant something, just get it in the ground, and you'll be surprised what you get from that.
And you do that by Googling local harvest and finding out the farms that do that?
Sure. Yeah. Localharvest.org is an online clearinghouse, but again, I think it could be as simple as just local farms near me. Throw in your zip code or something like that, and everybody has an online presence these days. Facebook, Instagram, all of that. It's all out there, and now really is that critical time. I know that many of the farms in my area have major seedling sales scheduled for the next 2 weeks. The traditional date for getting things into the ground here in New Hampshire is Memorial Day weekend, and that's coming up quickly. And these are all plants that have been timed to be at optimal health at the time of transplant for that window of time. So if you are encouraged by this and you want to try something, reach out to the farm down the street. Everybody is practicing appropriate social distancing. I'm hearing lots of innovative practices that are being employed to ensure that people can come to the farms without putting themselves or the farmers at risk. We all know the drill at this point. So.
All right, then. So have we missed anything related to the food aspect of this decentralization?
I don't think so. I think to just sum it up, I think we're healthier and we're more secure when we have more smaller sources of food available rather than fewer large sources of food. I'm under no illusions that we're ready to move away from large scale agriculture on the Midwestern scale. But as we chip away, we can engender change both on our health level, on our sustainability level, and our security levels as well. And it's as simple as putting some seeds into the ground.
So let me take that a step further, if we may. We talked about the seeds in the ground, critically important. What about the dairy? What about the chicken, the poultry, the other aspects?
Absolutely. Well, it's great that you asked that. Local dairy farms are rocking, and it's some of the best cheese and yogurt and raw milk that you're ever going to encounter. I know of many dairy farms, the Benedict farm in the Goffstown area, the Brookford farm up in Canterbury. Many of the small dairies are just, they can't keep up with the demand that's there. And that was a demand that existed pre-COVID. Now it's all the more sought after. With respect to for people that choose to eat sustainably raised meat, there are many farms raising beef, raising pork, raising poultry, doing it with non-GMO grains or grass-based agriculture, to mimic the types of proteins that we are evolutionarily adapted to eating. With respect to chicken, the pastured poultry movement is something that is very large in New Hampshire right now, raising these chickens on grass, outside, free range, not the free range that you see at the supermarket, true, legitimate free range. And knowing that those insects are consuming grass, the beta carotenes that are inside of that, consuming grasshoppers, insects, worms. When you crack a pasture-raised egg in a bowl next to a farm-raised egg, you see the shocking orange yolk, and that is the omega-3s and the rich, healthy saturated fats that allow us to have cellular repair on many levels, and just really have that nutrient density that allows us to function optimally. Those exist in abundance in New Hampshire. We're incredibly fortunate to have a robust and well-established local food network here. Chickens for meat as well. Prior to this phone call with you today, I had a young gentleman reach out to me wondering if I might have a piece of pasture that I could lease to him for his chicken operation. And we're going to speak later on today. So I'm encouraged. I should say that in addition to the education that we do at the farm, we also run this model as a collaborative farm space. So I have 6 other farmers of various ages that work here, use various aspects of this land for their different operations, whether it be vegetable production or beef production or poultry production or nursery or beekeeping or what have you. And they are, no pun intended, cross-pollinating with ideas and resources and trying to make things optimized to get as much productivity out of this space as we can. So I'm hoping that we might be able to add a mindful and humane chicken farmer to this mix as well. And I guarantee you somebody is doing that within 20 minutes of where all of your listeners are sitting right now. It's happening. It may not be well advertised, but it's out there and you can find it. through the grapevine, through the internet, through your friends, through the health food store, what have you.
Okay, one other component, beans, seeds, for lentils and things like that.
Sure. Sure, absolutely. Dried beans is a traditional type of New England agriculture. We know Beantown, Boston, and we think of, Maine for the many varieties that were developed up there. Maybe not the biggest effort to return ratio for the home gardener with those dried beans. But certainly there are small farms that make this available, particularly robust still up in Maine. I know in New Hampshire, and I hope I don't butcher the name, there is Bars, Bahr, I believe, Bars beans or Bears beans that does a lot of the old-fashioned heirloom varieties, things like striped cattle beans and, all kinds of things that you're not going to see on the grocery store shelf from Goya or one of those other conglomerates that are out there. Certainly, there's the ability to get a tremendous reward from green beans or shell peas or snap peas in the garden. That's really easy. That's something that the time to plant is now. And you'll have green snap peas, 45 days from those going into the ground. You can have them grow up some chicken wire, or you can train them up strings on the side of a building, or, very, very easy to do. So for those that focus on more vegetarian-based diets, making sure that you have those lentils or those legumes as a source of protein is important too. And that can certainly be achieved, partially on the home scale and partially through seeking out mindful producers, both locally and in the larger New England region.
Excellent. Now let's shift gears and talk about solar, wind energy, water energy. Let's go for it. Important
Absolutely.
things.
Well, I'm thrilled to be talking to you today. I'm sitting beneath 31 solar panels on my home's roof right now as I speak with you, and I'm proud to say that the farm here is generating 100% of its energy needs on an annual basis. I'm particularly fortunate to work for a company that does very interesting projects in your own backyard in Nashua. I'm proud to say that Revision just did a pioneering project with the Nashua Soup Kitchen that went into place last year. So the Nashua Soup Kitchen is now that nonprofit is now entirely powered by solar energy. And think about what that means to have the energy costs taken away from their operating budget. How can they now, extend the critical mission that they serve in their community? And solar is no longer a luxury. It's no longer a lark. It is a way that we can, just as we do with gardens, move away from this centralized production and bring it down to the home or the business scale. Because electricity and energy as it exists today is largely the result of, believe it or not, a bunch of kind of arbitrary technical decisions that were made 100 years ago as to what grid infrastructure was going to look like, what the centralized distribution infrastructure of electricity was going to look like in the United States. And as we have evolved as a society in the ways that we use energy and consume energy, we've started to push the limits of what that grid infrastructure can do. And we worry in the summer on a hot, humid day. Will there be a brownout today? We worry about in the middle of storms. Will there be a blackout? We worry when there's trouble in the Middle East. What will the source of our energy be? We worry about the impact of health considerations on coal miners, and we worry about the health implications of fracking for natural gas production on our communities. Well, that can all be done with solar panels that generate the amount of energy that goes into their own production in just about a year and a half. What I'm saying is, a solar panel can produce the energy that went into its own production in about a year and a half, and then continue to produce energy for 25 to 40 years after that. Most of the solar projects that I work on now have a payback of just around 9 years. And if you want to break that down into economic terms, go back to Wall Street that we talked about at the beginning. That's about an 11% annual return on investment. So it's people are actually making and saving quite a bit of money with solar projects. It's not something that is solely the domain of environmental martyrs anymore, people who are going to pay more to have their electricity generated. You can both be environmentally positive and economically positive with a well-designed solar or small wind or other types of renewable energy projects. For folks that don't have the opportunity to put solar on their roofs because their home might have a complex architecture, which is how you and I met, Yvonne. We assessed your home, and we figured that although it was such a lovely home, there were some challenging aspects to the roof design. That may be a factor for folks, or the roof might be shaded, or they may be renters or something of that nature. We're starting to see the development of more and more solar farms in New Hampshire, community solar farms, which is very similar to the community supported agriculture that we talked about before, where there is a larger solar installation and people purchase a share of the generation from that operation, and its value is allocated to their energy accounts. So I would say that we have crossed the threshold of solar in New Hampshire. It's a thing here now. You can't go, 100 feet down the road without seeing a solar array. And more importantly, we're seeing more and more municipalities and businesses and institutions move forward with large scale projects because the economics are really there, and the ability to control their own destiny from an energy perspective is something that I think appeals to a lot of people at this time.
So how can we encourage when individuals, due to like our roof, we couldn't do it, but we were very interested in looking at an option for solar? How can individuals in communities begin the discussion to have communities look at ways they can join together to try to have this ability to getting solar or wind energy available?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think it starts at the local government level. Many municipalities in New Hampshire have an energy committee and, or an environment committee. Here in my town, Newmarket, we have an energy and environment committee. And they're pursuing a solar project at this time as well. I think it starts with explorations of, where solar could be sited, and then communicating with a solar developer or designer of good reputation and really exploring what those options look like. Clearly, when we're talking on large scale projects of 2 or 3 or 4,000 solar panels, it's a little bit different than the homeowner who might be putting 20 or 25 solar panels on their roof. But the physics and the science is the same. It's just a little bit of a different scale. And what I like about solar is we're seeing more and more of it going into brownfield spaces, areas that may have, been, damaged in the past by being a landfill or being a Superfund site or something of that nature. And we're seeing a lot of solar go in there. We're also seeing lots of solar going in on top of large flat roof buildings, which is what a lot of municipalities have as their kind of seat of local government. A high school is a great example of that. The Dover High School just had an enormous solar array installed on top of it, which I was proud to be a part of. And that is generating a significant amount of the energy that school consumes on an annual basis. And I would argue that as engaged members of our communities who are all concerned about our property taxes and things like that in New Hampshire, that doing things that allow municipal budgets to be minimized because advantageous rate energy production can be implemented is something that we should all be thinking about, regardless of where one falls on the political spectrum. You can have both your environmental benefits and your economic benefits, all under that same umbrella. So it's unfortunate that it can be there can be partisan, discussions around solar. What I think we need to do is just, continue to have that grassroots movement where engaged individuals join a committee and explore options in their town. And one of the things that's really interesting is on that larger scale, because it's great when we put solar on each individual rooftop as a home. That's a good thing. But if we want to make big progress, we have to do big projects. And some of the innovative ways that Revision is developing projects right now are through what's called power purchase agreements. And one of the largest subsidies that people say is associated with solar is a large tax credit. There's a 26% tax credit on the cost of a solar project that homeowners or business owners can take on an annual basis. But that tax credit is not available to municipalities or nonprofits because they are not taxpayers. One of the ways that Revision has worked to get around that is we maintain a large group of impact investors who are on the front side, footing the cost of large-scale solar projects going in. And what's happening is for a period of time, typically 7 or 8 years, what's happening is the company continues to own the solar project, but the energy that is generated by the solar project is contractually sold to the institution or the municipality for a rate that is more advantageous than they would buy it from the conventional utility. And then after 7 or 8 years have passed and the depreciation of the solar array is equal to or approximates the value of the tax credit that they weren't able to take on the front side, there is a clause that allows the towns and the institutions to take ownership at that time. So in a way, they've put the project in for no cost up front. They've been able to realize the equivalent of a tax credit on that. And then they take ownership of an array that is going to robustly generate energy for another 25, 30, 35 years after the fact. So some of the innovative solar companies over there have really lowered the adoption threshold of what it takes to go forward with the solar project. No longer does a municipality have to come up with $2 million or something like that. There are people who invest in these projects, make them available to municipalities, and then turn ownership over at a time that is mutually advantageous. So it's kind of a win-win situation for everybody. And I don't think we have time to get too far into that today. And I suspect that's probably of a scale that's a little bit larger than some of your listeners are thinking about right now. But if they are interested in that, I would encourage them to reach out to their town's energy committee or form an energy committee if one doesn't exist, and encourage them to begin exploring whether there might be an option in their town. Is there an old gravel pit? Is there a brownfield site or something like that that might be appropriate? It's happening more than you think.
Are all solar companies equal? Should people be aware of what to look for if they're looking for, either through a community or through their own individual homes, solar panels and a good resource for solar?
Sure. It's a great question. And it's one that I do want to tread lightly on, because I do think more solar is a good thing, provided it is done well and that it meets the expectations that were set around that project. My company, Revision Energy, has been around for 17 years. We're an employee-owned company, and we are a certified B Corp. If people aren't familiar with B Corps are to business what certified organic is to a farm. It is a intensive third-party auditing and vetting that looks at all of the environmental and social considerations of the way we run our business, for everything from the representation of women and minorities in the company, to the waste stream we generate, to the human rights conditions in the factories where we source materials from, and countless other things as well. And it vets us on those points and certifies us as a company that walks the walk in addition to talking the talk. Other B Corps that people might be familiar with are Patagonia, Seventh Generation. Here in New Hampshire, there's Stonyfield Yogurt that's very well known. There, countless others as well. And here in New Hampshire, we also have Badger Balm and other companies too. These are all companies that you think of as having a very well espoused social mission, as well as a very high quality product. And what I will say is there are many good solar companies out there. Revision is not the only one. We like to think we do a very good job, but there are other good companies out there too. I do encourage people to look for companies that might be a B Corp. I do encourage people to look for employee-owned companies where there is a direct stake in the success of the company, for how well expectations are met. And I would encourage people to stay clear of some of the scenarios that are out there where people are encouraged to rent their roof and have solar go in for no cost, because there are more. That is a whole tangled ball of yarn that people are getting into when they get into those types of agreements. So I think when we talk about the adoption cost of a typical solar project, it might be a net cost of $17,000 or $18,000 after all of the various incentives are realized. And I'm mindful that that's not a small amount of money. That's the equivalent of putting a nice compact car up on somebody's roof, right? It's a big decision, but it's a decision that doesn't depreciate, and it's a decision that pays both environmental and economic returns on investment very significantly for a long period of time. There are different financing options out there, low rate, low interest loans that generally have people that close to a monthly payment that approximates what they're paying to the utility companies now. So as that rate of energy increases that you would buy from the utility over time, your monthly payment is staying lower than that because it's constant, and you're cash flow positive in a year or two with a financed solar project. If somebody's buying a solar project, it's paying for itself in 8 or 9 years, and free energy for the next 25 after that. So solar is not the only option. There is small wind. We don't typically see that in our suburban environments because there are some moving parts and some noise associated with that, and it does require more wind than most people think. Solar is really the big one you're seeing these days on the residential scale. But yes, there are great solar companies out there. I'm not here to pitch today. I'm just here to educate. But I would just say, look, if it doesn't feel right, there's probably a reason for that. Look for a company that's well established. Look for a company that has a track record of successful projects at a variety of scales, and do your own due diligence.
Okay, and what about hydro? So you talked briefly about wind, and you did talk about solar. What about water power?
So water power is really interesting, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert. I know enough probably to get in trouble, but I do know that we have created a tremendous amount of ecological damage over the years by damming our waterways and altering the hydrology of our watersheds. And now we're at a time where we're seeing some of those dams come out. Now, here where I'm sitting, I'm a stone's throw from Exeter, where the Tidal dam on the Squamscott Exeter River was taken out after several hundred years, just a couple of years back. And already we're seeing the return of anadromous fish to these ecosystems, fish that go out to the ocean and then come back to spawn in fresh water on an annual basis. We're seeing a tremendous increase in that. So I think the movement towards large-scale hydro is probably on the downside. Some people, if they have that cabin on the hill or something like that, there are micro hydro options that are out there where people are putting in small little things in streams, but that's probably not something that's going to go in on a regular conventional house lot type scenario. What I think is very interesting is the potential for tidal energy, and that is leveraging these immense forces that are associated with the tide coming in and going out on an annual basis, or a daily basis rather, multiple times, and using that to turn turbines, which generate electricity as well. I mean, it's an interesting time, Yvonne. Can you think of a place right now, anywhere around here, where they're going to put in another nuclear power plant or another coal burning power plant or anything like that? Who wants that in this day and age? Where are they going to do that? And I think the tide has turned. Decentralization is here. Generating energy on the home or business scale lessens the demand on the aging grid infrastructure that we have right now. It's just the right thing to do. So as people, begin to think about how they are engaging in their food, how they are engaging in their energy, particularly in these difficult times, I'm excited to say that I think there's a lot of options out there.
There are, and let's briefly summarize the options where people can get information. You talk about the local harvest, right? If they Google, what are the resources available? Let's summarize those.
Sure. On the Seacoast, there's the Seacoast Harvest Guide. If you Google that up, it'll be right there. Localharvest.org should be a resource that's available. I should have checked that URL before I came on today, but it's been in place forever. I'm sure it's still there. If it's not, something has taken its place. You can go online. You can just Google local farms near my zip code, or you can call up the local agway or something like that and ask them who has a small farm in my area. Get creative. We all know how to seek our own information in this day and age. So that I would recommend using the farms as a clearinghouse. And many of these farms are run by people who are wells of information. Just as myself, they're very similar. They've all engaged in these practices. They know who's doing what in the communities. They know what connections to make and who to direct you to if you want to pursue that fruit tree or that asparagus planting or that sheet mulched garden or what have you. They may know many of the farms on the Seacoast have worked with solar companies, so they may have a solar company that they would direct you towards. The information is out there. It's bordering, if not already on the mainstream radar screen. It's just, I think, a matter of redirecting our focus from our workaday routine of stopping by the grocery store for a couple items here, a couple items there. We've been forcibly extricated from that routine. We now are looking for more sustainable, more secure ways to fill that niche. And I think a lot of that is based around local agriculture and local energy production.
This has been such a helpful program, and I wish to thank you so very much because you've covered a true variety of very important information to help people to feel resourceful, independent, to really take care of their health and their wellness, and to relook at perhaps the silver lining in what we're going through with this pandemic, and that is to relook at how we've done things in the past and now have a new view of how we can do things from this point forward and literally be supportive of one another as well as help with our health and wellness. What were you about to say?
Well, I think you took the words right out of my mouth, Yvonne. Somebody told me the other day that chaos is a ladder and it gives us an opportunity to climb to new heights if we go about it in a mindful way. And I think that may be the silver lining that comes out of this as we take a good hard look. We've been forcibly interrupted from the groove that we've been riding in for so many years. And is that painful? Yes, it is. And we all feel that pain every day. But if we can look and see what opportunities are presented to us to better ourselves and to better our communities and to better our health and to better our resilience, then we might come out of this with abundance yet.
Without a doubt. So I have gratitude to you for everything that you're doing. You keep it up and really reach out and continue to educate people and help them to be resourceful and independent and collaborative in their approach. And in the meantime, to our audience, please really listen to this program and look at ways that you can integrate this information into your own lives. Be safe, be healthy, and take good care of each other. Thank you. Until next time.
Thank you, Yvonne. It's been my pleasure. Have a lovely day.
You too.